Right. Hello there, it's David Taylor, or Mr. Pelargonium, if, as people like to call me on some of the social media sites. As you can see today, I am in a different location. I am out and about today with Steve Pollard, the chairman of the Pelargonium and Geranium Society, and this man is the forthright authority on the Zonartic range of Pelargoniums, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Purely Zonartics, but Steve does a lot of breeding of all sorts of plants. Now Steve brought back seeds from Australia where he grew the seeds on as plants, and they've subsequently been released most in the UK by Fibrex Nursery to the commercial market, and today we're purely going to talk about a little bit of the history of them, because they started life very much in Australia from the well-respected hybridiser who unfortunately we lost at the turn of the year, Cliff Blackman. We'll talk a little bit about him and give you a bit of the basis of the plants and how they grow, how sort of the individuals perhaps grow them, the breeding of them, and some of the other things that may be relevant to that type of plant. So we're going to specifically talk about those today, and as you can see, it's good to be in a slightly different environment for a change. Steve has got an utterly packed greenhouse full of all types of plants. He particularly likes the Stella and Formosum types, does a lot of breeding of those, many of which are again available from Fibrex Nursery in the UK. But we're going to have a good chat today to give you a good basis for having a look at Zonartic Pelargoniums. So we'll kick off from there. So Steve, please carry on.
I first heard about the Zonartics back in 2005. Our good friend Andrew Simmons, whose parents owned Warrenoff Nursery, contacted me and said, "Have you seen the fantastic new plants, amazing flowers on the Geraniaceae website?" I went along and had a look. This would be about November 2005, and I was absolutely amazed at what had been achieved by this guy called Cliff Blackman. Of course, like everybody else who's seen them, I fell in love with them, but it was virtually impossible to visualise that I'd ever get a chance to see them. And then in February 2006, right out of the blue, I got a phone call from Australia, from Cliff, saying, would I like to go and talk about hybridising in the UK at a conference that they were holding in Geelong in October, November 2006. Well, I almost bit his hand off. Cliff met me as I got off the plane, and decided to show me around his amazing greenhouse and what he'd actually achieved. I was fortunate enough at the end of that conference to be given some seed by Cliff, and we corresponded for years after that. But he gave me seed which I brought back to the UK, and then used that as a basis for actually formulating my own hybrids. I didn't want to release the seeds that he had given me in case they had already been released, or plants similar to it, in Australia, because there's nothing worse than seeing plants in different hemispheres actually replicating themselves. So that was my first introduction, and I worked with those seeds, as I say, and I got some amazing results. I had intended to help Cliff get these recognised on a global basis, and so I wrote a paper which we presented to the Nomenclature Committee, the International Nomenclature Committee, and asked them whether they would actually recognise the Zonartics as an entity in their own right, and they did, and referred us back to the Pelargonium and Geranium Society, where we adopted the plant and acknowledged that it was something totally new and something totally different. I think we should probably just talk a little about the breeding that Cliff went into to achieve these amazing plants. He wrote to Stellenbosch, I believe, in university in South Africa, and asked them whether they had a version of Pelargonium articulatum which had flowers from the yellow spectrum. Articulatum actually has white flowers and other colours, other shades, but he got in touch with the right guy, and when that time was up, he went down there, not knowing exactly what plants he had, and there was this very, very tiny plant amongst them of articulatum, Pelargonium articulatum, and he was absolutely delighted. The first thing he did was obviously to grow that on, and it grew on reasonably well. However, the first thing he did was to actually self-seed it to ensure that if he lost that plant, he would have future seeds which he could sow to use for his breeding program. This was back in 1985, and here we are a whole load of years later, where we're only just seeing these plants actually introduced into the mainstream.
Am I right, Steve, in thinking that Cliff's original idea was to try and ultimately breed a relatively decent yellow zonal type Pelargonium? That was really what he was, back in 1985 odd.
That was the only thought in his head at that time.
Right, okay. So these are all the Zonartics that eventually came, were almost like a byproduct of that process.
The amazing thing was that, I mean, if I just explain, anyone who hasn't grown as an articulatum, it is a very unusual plant. It's very unwieldy. It grows as a rhizome under the ground, and then it throws up its leaves and its flowers from underneath the ground. So to try and cross that with a zonal, which he did, well, in fact, his first crosses were with Millfield Gem, which is a hybrid ivy, I believe, and also a zonal which he'd grown. And then he crossed those two together, and then he kept crossing back to Pelargonium articulatum. So the plants that he originally got were sort of horizontal, long, unwieldy, huge stems, and single flowers. And I think it took him 10 years before he actually got his first yellow. And yes, you're right. He was only interested initially in achieving a yellow Pelargonium. Subsequently, what he found was that he was getting beautiful pastel colours. He was getting colours, tricolours in the flowers, peaches, and colours we've never experienced before. So, what he achieved in his lifetime was absolutely amazing. As I say, I bought the seed back and I worked with it, and then I wrote a paper which we submitted to the nomenclature committee, which had, I would add, I actually showed it to him and he made corrections to what I'd written, but we were delighted obviously when the name Zonartic, which is formed from the word zonal and articulatum by putting two words together, was actually recognised, and and he could actually put a tag on these beautiful plants that he'd created.